recording now. Since I said I would record, but I didn't. Next story is entitled Doing Tricks. On the northern slope of a hill in southern England, near the village of Woolston, is an artifact from another era. It's a drawing of an enormous horse, made at least 3,000 years ago. Thanks to the white chalk that fills in the artwork, which is more than 350 feet long, it's been known for centuries as the White Horse of Uffington. In April 2017, the National Trust in Southern England announced that it had made a new exciting discovery on the hill, a second chalk figure, nearly as large, that depicted another regional animal, the duck. Now, I love Uffington. I've been there twice in the last decade, and it's one of my favorite places in all of England, so I felt compelled to read the full article. But when I did, I was surprised by what I found. While the article was accompanying a video were published on March 31st. Oh, I'm so sorry. I messed up the entire sentence. While the article and accompanying video were published on March 31st, they were promoted on social media the following day, April 1st. The duck, you see, was an April Fool's Day joke. Now, I'll admit I was more than a bit relieved. The White Horse is special after all, but every year on the 1st of April, countless jokes are played out on the local and national level all around the world, taking our expectations and assumptions for a ride. Google might just be the biggest perpetrator of the last few years, spending what some think is millions of dollars to create fake product videos, elaborate prototypes, and full websites. It's not a new thing, though. Humans have always been easily fooled by and prone to create trickery. Ancient mythology is full of characters known as tricksters, and modern media has added a plethora of new names to that list. The Joker from Batman, Q from Star Trek, even Bugs Bunny and Bart Simpson. And we love them all for it. But it's not always fun in games. Many trickster legends are far darker than modern cartoons and movies. In fact, some of them are a lot more frightening than you'd think. Thank you for the alert, Kaz. If you've come anywhere within 10 feet of a comic book-inspired movie in the last decade, you've probably been exposed to a number of modern spins on a very old idea. In fact, nearly all of the Marvel movies include one character lifted straight out of ancient mythology and brought back to life by Tom Hiddleston, the Norse god Loki. Loki does a great job of living up to the true definition of a trickster. Across the globe and the pages of history, nearly all ancient tricksters have stuck to the same small list of characters. They're morally ambiguous, bouncing between acts of good and evil with surprising flexibility. They have the power to create and destroy. They're often a messenger, bringing bad news or tragedy to a community. And they excel at taking any situation and flipping it on its head. Writing about Loki nearly 900 years ago, Icelandic poet and historian Icelandic poet and historian Snorri Sturluson described him as being handsome and fair of face, but he has an evil disposition and is very changeable of mood. He excelled all men in the art of cunning, and he always cheats. He was continually involving the Aesir in great difficulties, and he often helped them out again by guile. But Loki isn't alone in the trickster space. Greek mythology has Hermes, who was, among other things, the god of thieves. West African folklore has the spider Anansi, although some stories tell of trickster rabbits as well. Many scholars think those are the roots of more modern tales of the Briar Rabbit, a supposition that might very well be true. Folklore, as we've discussed so many times before, has a way of growing and adapting over the years. We can see that evolution in European folklore. Those old ideas of tricksters who break the rules and make life difficult found fresh expression in new tales and legends. These stories are different but also the same, if you know what I mean. Because underneath all the cultural dress and decoration, every trickster is a shapeshifter, whether in practice or just metaphorically. Tricksters adapt and shift and change. Sometimes they're the ones doing the transformation, but oftentimes it's the status quo that gets reinvented. If there's a rule, whether social or moral or legal, the trickster is there to bend or break you. In Europe, the concept of one single trickster god transformed into the idea of a trickster creature. Ooh, sorry. I misread that entire sentence. In Europe, the concept of one single trickster god transformed into the idea of trickster creatures, plural. Their details vary from place to place, but most of their names are just as familiar to us now as Loki. Leprechauns, brownings, hobgoblins, puka, elves, gnomes. Each name conjures a unique creature in your mind. I'm sure, but for centuries they've all been multiple expressions of the same trickster archetype. These creatures are united by some common physical traits, too. Sure, they're troublesome and morally fluid, but they're also almost universally described as small humanoid beings. Dwarves, elves, tiny men and women, small enough to be overlooked or unseen by humans, but large enough to get into trouble. Leprechauns are a great example. Their name literally means small body, and while that's not a quality of the most ancient trickster ideas, it certainly lines up with most modern interpretations. And, of course, they're morally sketchy. One scholar describes them as not wholly good nor wholly evil. Second, trickster creatures were often described as red or black in color. Some stories say it's a skin color, others say it's fur, but the reasons behind the colors had to do with the superstition about evil powers. Black and red, for a very long time, were considered bad colors, so if you wanted to describe something as evil, of course it was black, or red, or both. In Celtic folklore, we have the puka, who are viewed as dangerous bringers of bad luck. I mentioned them earlier, but in addition to being small, they're also usually described as covered in black fur. Oh, and they're shapeshifters, frequently transforming themselves into black horses, a fact that I'll need you to file away for later references. There are many more cultural variants, but I want to mention just one more, the lutin. These are a distinctly French version. Like the others, they're said to be small people, typically men, who are prone to mischief and prank-like fun. And like the puka, they can shapeshift into animals. But the lutin is unique in that it likes to take the form of a black cat, something most people recognize as having some element of power in various superstitions. And because of that, they are often seen as companions to witches and sorcerers, capable of cursing anyone who crosses their path. You know what? File that one away too, okay? The notion of tiny tricksters is clearly embedded in European folklore. They seem to pop up everywhere, from the works of Shakespeare to the Harry Potter stories and everywhere in between. All of them are small in size and morally ambiguous, and need to be appeased to avoid negative consequences. What's truly fascinating about folklore, though, is just how portable it is. You can take a person out of their culture, but it's much more difficult to take that culture out of them. So when Europeans began to settle in the New World, it's no surprise that they brought their superstitions and beliefs with them. Many of those stories were meant to be entertaining. They were benign and harmless stories of morality. But 3 centuries ago, one settlement experienced something that shined a whole new light on the meaning and power of trickster mythology. And what it revealed was beyond frightening. Antoine Laumet experienced the stereotypical meteoric rise that all of us dream about. He came to the New World at a time when New France extended the full length of the Mississippi River from the modern-day Canada to Louisiana in the south. And at the beginning, Antoine was nothing more than a fur trapper and explorer. He walked thousands of miles, spent far too many nights in the cold, and owned nothing more than what he was able to carry on his back. But he was dependable and smart, and had a brilliant grasp of the French territories in the New World. That skill didn't go unnoticed, coming to the attention of not just the governor of New France, but even the king himself, Louis XIV. Which is why, by 1694, at the age of 36, Laumet found himself in command of the French troops at Fort de Bode, in what is now northern Michigan. By then, he had bestowed upon himself a fancy new title and was known as Antoine Laumet de la Mothe, Sieur de Cadillac. But since that takes me about 15 minutes to pronounce, let's just stick with Antoine, shall we? Antoine, you see, was about to experience a significant boost to his reputation and power, and it's a journey we need to follow him on. In 1701, Antoine was given permission to establish a new fort about 300 miles south on a patch of land situated on a narrow channel that connects Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. The colonial minister had granted him 15 square miles there to build the fort and settlement around it, and he was eager to get started. On March 10th of that year, the governor of New France held a celebration for Antoine to congratulate him on his new mission and title. The room was full of people with great power and position. There was food and drink, crystal and silver, and more ceremony than most of us will ever experience in our modern lives. And at the center of it all was Antoine. Hours into the celebration, a door on the far side of the room swung open, and in stepped an old woman. She wasn't dressed in her finest. She didn't hold a title that matched the other guests. In fact, she was, in their eyes at least, less than significant. But she walked in with more authority and poise than any of them could have mustered. As she drew closer, it became clear that she wasn't alone. There upon her shoulder sat something dark. It was a cat. A black cat. She told them her name was Mother Monique, and she was there to tell their fortunes. The men, cheerfully drunk out of their wits, welcomed the offer, and almost immediately all of them held their hands out to her, waiting to have their palms read. She went down the table, hand by hand, describing in great detail the past of each person she touched. Every time she paused to examine a new one, the cat on her shoulder would lean in towards her head. Some thought it was licking her ear, but others swore it was whispering things to her. Finally, she came to Antoine, but before she could speak, he shook his head. "See what you can tell me about my future," he told her. "I care not for the past." The woman nodded and took out a small metal bowl and a vial of thick silver liquid, almost like mercury. Then she poured the liquid into the bowl, took Antoine's hand again, and began to speak. "Your future is strange," she told him. "You will soon go on a dangerous journey and found a great city. Someday that city will be home to more than all of New France right now." Antoine nodded with approval and asked her to continue, which she did reluctantly. "Your future is also dark," she continued. "It's cloudy, and your stars difficult to see. Your policies will cause trouble and bring about your ruin. The city you found will become home to war and bloodshed. The English will try to take it away. And then one day, many years from now, it will finally prosper under a flag we've never seen before." And then she uttered one final warning. "Your name will be forgotten, even in the very city you founded. But know this, you can change it all. Your future is still yours to decide. Just remember not to offend the one thing with the power to bring it all crashing down." The woman paused, and everyone in the room seemed to pause with her, holding their breath to hear just what being had the ability to destroy the life of such a powerful man. Then she spoke again. It was barely a whisper. "Whatever you do, do not offend the Nain Rouge." Even the words themselves are French. There is no record in Europe of a creature by the name of Nain Rouge, the Red Dwarf. It seems to be a purely Northern American tale, although we could make the argument that the core element of the legend borrowed heavily from European folklore. Dwarf-like, red clothing, easily upset. But hold on, I think I'm just getting ahead of myself. Let's say this. By this point, Antoine had lived in the territory of New France for a very long time, as had the others in the room that night, and none of them questioned the witch over that name. They were clearly very familiar with it, although how or why is still a mystery. While the others might have felt the weight of significance at the mention of the Nain Rouge, Antoine seemed unfazed. He was confident in his future and continued his preparations for the journey south. He had a great city to found after all. It's hard to fight the pull of destiny when it's so sweet and bright, like a siren song. His expedition left in early June of 1701 and arrived at their destination about 6 weeks later on July 24th. They called it Fort Pontchartrain. Pontchartrain? Wait, let me figure this French word out. Pontchartrain is what I'm going to say. Yep. In honor of the French statesman, and things immediately took off. They built a friendly partnership with the local Native American tribes and set to work building all the things an 18th century military outpost would need: a tall fence of the stockade, a storehouse, a church, and, of course, the fort structure itself. French, hon hon hon, oui oui. After that, life settled into a wonderful period of growth and prosperity for several years. The community was growing, and so was Antoine's reputation. He was gifted with a large plot of land by the crown and soon had a home built there. Then, in May 1707, the community held their annual celebration around the maypole. It was that night that Antoine had a bizarre and frightening encounter. He and his wife were walking back from the celebration to their new home, talking about their good fortune and bright future, when two other locals passed them. Antoine and his wife could overhear their conversation. They were essentially complaining about the wealth and position of Antoine and others, with their fine silver and nice clothing. Then the stranger told his companion and his wife that his wife had recently seen the little red man. Just as he was about to say more, they moved farther away and the words were swept up into the wind. But Antoine's wife had heard enough and pointed it out to her husband. "The Nain Rouge is what the witch warned you about," she told him, but he shrugged it off. It was nonsense, superstition, nothing to be concerned about, no point in wasting time discussing it. So they walked on. And that's when a small figure stepped out of the darkness and into the middle of the path. As it was later described, this figure was a dwarf, with a red face and shimmering eyes. When it saw them, the creature pulled its face into a wide, vicious grin, revealing sharp, animal-like teeth. Antoine's wife stepped back and shouted in fear. Her husband, though, moved forward. He swung his cane at the creature, striking it right atop the head. "Get out of the way, you imp!" As the cane connected with the creature's skull, the creature vanished into thin air. Even as it did, though, the shrill echo of its laughter could still be heard in the darkness. Antoine's wife, still shaking from the surprise of it all, turned and reminded her husband of the witch's warning. "You offended him," she said. "You were supposed to appease him, but now you've made him angry. Your future, our future, is now at risk." Again, Antoine shrugged it off. But a few days later, after visiting Montreal, he was arrested as a result of a secret scheme by his political enemies and quickly put on trial. Subsequently, he was forced to sell his claim to the new settlement. The rest of his life was a series of failures, and his wife never forgot why. Antoine had dared to cross the Nain Rouge. I'd like to say that the curse ended there, but it didn't. In fact, it seems to have grown worse as the years passed. In 1763, long after Antoine and his contemporaries had passed away, a battle was fought near the fort, and at that point under British control. A group of Native American tribes united under a leader named Pontiac, and had gathered to lay siege to the fort, pinning the British down for months. On July 31st, 250 British soldiers tried striking at Pontiac's camp, but failed horribly. Today it's known as the Battle of Bloody Run, and it comes with an interesting bit of legend attached to it. Multiple eyewitnesses claim that after the battle was over, a small red man was seen dancing on the sandy banks of the river. He was laughing as he lightly stepped over around the piles of corpses. 42 years later, in 1805, more tragedy struck the community. Fire broke out on June 11th in the building of a local baker, John Harvey. Within hours, the entire town was engulfed in flames, leveling it to the ground. They say all you could see after was a forest of chimneys there, where the buildings had once stood. Now, large fires are common in those days, especially in cities built almost entirely of wood. But what set this fire apart from the others was the multiple sightings of something incredibly odd in the days before it happened. Something that, without context, might not make sense at all. There were sightings, people claimed, of a small red dwarf. We all have plans. We have expectations and hopes and a picture in our minds of the way something is supposed to play out. Tricksters exist to shatter those plans. They are a tool of folklore to explain why things don't always go our way, why plans fail or tragedies befall communities. Yes, Sheepy, I will take a drink. If things had gone according to Antoine's plans, the city he founded would bear his name to this day, Cadillac. Instead, he fell from grace and the settlement took a different name, the generic French word for a street, Detroit. Of course, he's not completely forgotten, though. When William Murphy and Henry Leland created their automotive company in 1902, they looked for a local name to lend the brand some class, so they called it Cadillac, and for a long time they used Antoine's coat of arms as their company emblem. Oh my goodness. Of course, it's easy to chalk all of this up to the power of folklore, to say that this legend was simply part of the superstitions of the French settlers who found themselves far away from home in unfamiliar territory. Every immigrant brings stories with them on their journey, so why would this be any different? But as I said before, there's no mention in European folklore of a creature named the Nain Rouge. The story is highly detailed and clearly rooted in something, though, so it should come as no surprise that the Native American tribes of the area around modern-day Michigan and southern Ontario have their own tales of trickster gods named Nanabush, described as red, small, and able to shift into other shapes. And I won't be doing my job if I didn't point out how similar the name Nanabush sounds to Nain Rouge. Hello, Mushu! It has been a very long time. Welcome, welcome! Detroit hasn't forgotten the little trickster, though. In fact, he's more popular than ever. If you travel around the city, you can find local beer named Nain Rouge. There's also a wine that came out a couple years ago. It is, of course, a red wine. And then there's the parade that started in 2010. Each year, thousands of people dress up in costumes and march through the city. At the end of the route, they destroy a large effigy of the Nain Rouge as a way of banishing the evil from the city for another year. But maybe attacking him isn't the best of ideas. Time will tell. One last note. Back in March of 1976, a major storm hit Detroit. Several inches of ice coated trees and power lines, snapping limbs and knocking out power all over the city. A tornado was even sighted north of the city. It was one of those storms so devastating and powerful that even 40 years later, people still speak about it with a bit of awe in their voice. The day before the storm arrived, though, 2 utility workers were out inspecting a power line when they saw something odd. Something was climbing one of the nearby poles, and it looked an awful lot like a child, which wasn't good. So they shouted and ran towards the pole to help the child down. As they did, the small shape reached the top and actually stood up on the tip of the pole. A moment later, it jumped off into the air and vanished from sight. But not before the workers got a better look. It wasn't a child after all, but a tiny, bearded man. That is the end of that specific part of the book, and the next section is titled Back to Nature. I forgot how much I love this book. This series is so fascinating. How are you, Mushu? I saw that your child was attempting to do something very, very concerning in the background of a very cute photo that you took of yourself. Trees and shadows. Some of the things we see aren't what they appear to be. Heather Bowie and her cousins learned that lesson back in 1989. She was 11 at the time, and according to her mother, Karen, it was a bright winter day. The sort of day where the sun reflects off the snow, which always has a way of making dark objects like houses and trees stand out. I am happy that my trip to Detroit was so well documented. Donkey is over 300 years old, confirmed. He's been causing mischief and caused the ruin of an entire city? Oh my gosh. That's actually really funny. That caught me off guard. Heather and her cousins were walking along a small country road that ran between their town and the next when they saw a dog sitting in a stream near the roadside. Well, stream might be too strong a term. It was just a small bit of runoff, the sort that passes beneath roads through these big metal culverts, you know? It was a drainage ditch, basically. I was old when this world was young, 3 feet dwarf noises. And you call me small. What the hell? But kids love dogs, so Heather and the others veered off the roadside into the snow to walk towards it. They assumed it was a local pet that had wandered a bit too far from home, so they planned to check its collar and see what they could do. But even from a distance, it looked a bit odd. To be specific, it looked too big to be a dog. They took one more step towards it and then stopped. They stopped because that's when the dog turned to look at them, and as it did so, it did something they weren't expecting. It stood up on its hind legs like a human. Obviously frightened, the girls ran home as fast as they could. Humans have always had a connection with animals. We live with them in our homes. We depend on them for food and resources. We identify with them, sometimes even treating them more like people than beasts. We speak to them, we name them, and we project human personalities onto them. For thousands of years, we've treated them as if they're more than humans, or more than animals. But of course, that's just our imagination. If we believe the stories, though, it might be more true than we expected. As I said before, some things aren't what they appear to be. Sometimes they're worse. Can I pet that dog? Do you really want to pet a dog that stands up on its hind legs and is tall as hell? Because that sounds terrifying. Our connection to animals is nearly as old as humanity itself. We've all... Sorry. Big dog. Yes. We've almost always treated them as important parts of the world around us, although different cultures have expressed that importance in a variety of ways. I tried to read when I didn't have any air in my lungs. Yep. In a variety of ways. The common thread, though, is that animals have always helped us to better understand our world. Some cultures have revered them as gods, others have seen them as valuable sacrifices to offer to whatever deity they want to please. In many cultures, animals have served as our companions through daily life, and others they've journeyed with the dead into the afterlife. Just think about what we know of ancient Egyptian culture. There were entire cults built around specific animals, which are such as bulls and cats. Their dead were frequently buried alongside animals that held personal or spiritual significance, and many of the Egyptian gods and goddesses were represented through simple animal symbolism. Anubis, for example, was part man and part jackal. Sekhmet was a woman with the head of a lion. Ancient Hindu teachings, for thousands of years, have demanded deep respect for the animals around us. In China, the ancient philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism both stress the same thing. For the Hindus, that respect is founded on the idea of reincarnation. In China, it's rooted more in moral responsibility. But the result is the same. Animals are and always have been important to us. And yes, I know that ancient cultures focus a lot of their religion and practice on the sun and moon and stars, but they often frame those complex systems with animal-related language. That's why so many cultures have their own zodiac systems, where the major constellations are represented by animals. The Greek root for the word zodiac, by the way, literally means circle of animals. As an idea, the Egyptian word for cat was min, which sounds a lot like the noise cats actually make. And that classic stereotypical dog name, Fido, it comes from the Latin word fidelis, which means faithful and loyal. It's easy to see then how animals have helped us understand our world a little better. They help us find our bearings and keep us company in a big, wild world. More significantly, though, they've helped us understand ourselves by giving humans a sense of identity and purpose, a theme or a banner to unite around, in a sense. Sometimes those themes took the form of religion, as was the case in Egypt with the bull cult. Sometimes it's more of a totem thing, where an entire tribe or community builds their identity around a significant animal from their environment. Sometimes they did it for a feeling of safety. Sometimes the animal was a symbol of power. In Icelandic folklore, the Norse warrior class was known as The Norse warrior class known as berserkers were members of the bear cult. Berserker, in Old Norse, literally meant bear-shirred, but it also embodied the fierce, powerful nature that they wanted for themselves as warriors. They were often depicted wearing bear skins and sometimes even bear heads as head coverings. That's a tradition that still survives, by the way. You can see it in the ceremonial military caps worn by some personnel in multiple European countries. Yes, Scandinavia mentioned again. The most common tribal animal, though, has always been the wolf. It's a global fascination seen in cultures in Mexico, the United States, Canada, India, Mongolia, and many countries of the Middle East. This is probably because wolves represent so much of what early humanity identified with. They move in packs, they hunt their food, and they have a distinct social hierarchy. Any hunter-gatherer community would instantly admire those qualities. And, like bears, wolves were also seen as brave and powerful warriors. Ancient Persian and Hittite warriors were known to dress in wolfskins for battle. Interestingly, though, they also had a reputation for tossing their weapons aside and just jumping on their enemies, literally biting them like animals. For a very long time, humans have wanted to be animals. Which of course led to stories in which that was the case. Animals that became people, people who became animals. It's an idea so powerful that we can find it hiding inside folklore of dozens of countries. The Native American skinwalker, the Nagual of the... Oh god, I don't like saying that name. I'm so sorry. Flesh pedestrian. We're just gonna go with flesh pedestrian. I'm gonna have to take a hot shower after that. The Nagual of Central America, and then, throughout much of Europe, there's the werewolf. They're all stories, of course, artifacts from another time when animals were gods and humans desperately wanted to imitate the divine. For a very long time, people have wanted to be animals. Therefore, we got furries. Yes. And yes, these stories also address our dual nature, because we are, in many ways, nothing more than animals ourselves, right? But those moral lessons have a way of distracting us from the plot. For thousands of years, people have told stories of mysterious beasts. And it turns out, those stories might be more real than we care to believe. In 1989, a woman was driving along the same country road that Heather Bowie and her cousins had just walked along weeks before when they'd sighted the strange creature. In Lorraine Andrezi's case, it was well after sunset, so she was doing the responsible thing and scanning the road for wild animals. Wisconsin has plenty of deer after all, and deer don't mix well with windshields and front ends. Lorraine worked as a manager at one of the local bars in Elkhorn and had just wrapped up a very long, very tiring shift. And all she really wanted to do was get home safely. But when she did notice something unusual, it wasn't in the periphery of her headlight beams. It was right on the road in front of her. Seeing it early enough gave her the chance to slow down and swerve to avoid hitting it, but it also helped her get a good look at it. From a distance, it looked as if it was an animal hunched low to the pavement in the opposite lane. Its head was gently bobbing at an irregular rhythm, too. She couldn't tell for sure, but it almost seemed to be eating. Then, as she slowly passed it, she claimed she saw that it was eating all right. Whatever it was, the creature was hunched over a pile of roadkill, pulling big chunks of flesh off the dead animal. Lorraine said she could clearly make out what appeared to be long white fangs that protruded from a gray snout. Together with the pointed ears, she couldn't help but think it was a wolf. The trouble was, this wolf was kneeling on the road, like a human. It's one story, I know, and stories that are born in the middle of the night after an exhausting day at work are often full of flaws. That might very well be the case here. I think we've all had those moments when we've seen things that don't make sense. So Lorraine's story could just be a bit of midnight confusion, I suppose. If it wasn't for the other stories. 2 years later, on Halloween night, in fact, it was Doris Gibson's turn. She was just 18 at the time and had been driving out to pick up a friend for some trick-or-treating back in town. Like Lorraine, before her, she was driving that same stretch of country road named for the old Bray family farm that it passed. According to the story, Doris later told a local reporter she'd briefly taken her eyes off the road to switch stations on the radio when she felt the car lurch. It was as if she said she'd run something over. Frightened by the possibility of what had just happened, she stopped her car, put it in park, and then got out for a look. Doris, it seemed, wasn't a big horror movie fan, because anyone who knows anything about horror films know that you never, ever get out of your car. Ever. Still, there wasn't a scratch on her car. The bumper was spotless, and no sign of blood or fur or anything else that might hint at fresh roadkill. And even more convincing, there was nothing on the road. No dead animal, no unlucky farmer out for an evening walk, not even a pothole. There was no clue anywhere that could explain the bump she'd felt. She was about to turn and head back to her car when movement caught her attention. There was something in the trees and shadows along the roadside. According to her, it was a large figure that stood upright like a man but seemed hairy and very muscular. Which, as you might imagine, was a pretty shocking thing to see on a dark, lonely country road. So, Doris did the smart thing and bolted for her car door. Just as she did, the thing, whatever it was, chased after her. Doris said she could hear the heavy thud of the creature's feet on the pavement behind her and the sound of deep, panting breaths. Thankfully, she managed to get into the car and quickly shifted back into drive. But as soon as she pulled away, she felt her car shudder once more. When she looked into her rearview mirror, all she could see was the dark silhouette of the creature filling her back window. It had jumped onto her trunk. Whatever her attacker was, she claimed that it fell off when she got her car moving quickly enough, but she wasn't willing to stop for another look. She did, however, continue to her friend's house, and eventually they both headed back to town for some Halloween fun. Later that night, on her drive back along Bray Road to drop her friend off at home, Doris swears that she saw the figure one more time. It was far off in the distance, at the edge of the light cast by her headlights, but it was the same unmistakable shape. Tall, thick, and very animal-like, but standing upright on two legs. It wasn't until the next day, in the safety of her own driveway, and by the light of the noonday sun, that she took another look at the car. There, on the trunk, she found evidence that something peculiar and very dangerous had taken place the night before. Long, vicious scratches, all grouped together as if they had been made by claws. This is the point in the story where you probably expect me to clarify what the creature was. All of the physical descriptions certainly point towards folklore regarding werewolves, but almost no one in Elkhorn made that connection. Maybe that's because there were never any stories of humans transforming into monsters. Or perhaps it's because the sightings weren't limited to full moons. In the end, whatever it might have been, the people of the area took to calling it the Beast of Bray Road. But there were other theories, of course. One common suggestion was rooted in the Native American folklore about a giant wolf known as the Shunka Vatican, which was described as a sort of hybrid between a wolf and a coyote. Others have been comparisons to the Inuit stories of the Amarok or the Vahila, both of which were enormous monstrous wolves. But honestly, there are far too many human characteristics attributed to the Bray Road creature that could make the comparison stick. And that's without taking into account the additional sightings, because Lorraine and Doris weren't the only ones to see something strange along that stretch of country road. And once they spoke to a local reporter, others found the courage to come forward with their tales of their own. Marvin Kirschnick was one of them. According to his testimony, he had his own encounter way back in 1981, a full decade before Doris Gibson's. Unlike the others, though, his sighting didn't happen in the dark. He'd been driving along Highway 11, which runs just northeast of Elkhorn, and as he approached the turnoff for Bray Road, he saw an unusual animal among the trees along the side of the road. Kirschnick slowed down when he saw it, and he pulled over to get a better look. The way he described it, much of the creature was obscured by the underbrush, but it was clearly wolf-like. They stared at each other for a moment before the beast moved towards the car. Frightened, Kirschnick drove away quickly. 5 years later, in 1986, Diane Koenig was traveling in the same area, returning home after a day in nearby Burlington. From a distance, her headlights didn't give her a very clear view, so at first it just looked like a tall man was walking along the side of the road with something heavy in his arms. As she drew closer, though, Koenig saw that this man had the head of a wolf, and the heavy burden it held in its arms turned out to be a full-sized deer. Unlike Kirschnick, though, Koenig didn't stop for a closer look and instead sped up, just in case the creature decided to give chase. She kept the story to herself for years out of fear that she'd be considered a lunatic. More stories flooded in. One unnamed girl told the authorities that she'd been chased up a tree by a wolf that had stayed there for over an hour while it paced around trying to find a way to climb up after her. What struck her as odd, though, was that the wolf walked on its hind legs. When she led her parents back to the tree the next day, they found large claw marks on the lower portion of the trunk. Even Scott Bray, who lived on the family farm that gave the road its name, claimed to have seen extraordinary things, including enormous wolf tracks. Local animal control authorities were called to several homes in the area to examine and collect a large number of mutilated animal corpses. A few townsfolk tried to blame that one on satanic cults, but everyone else agreed it was the beast of Bray Road. Oh my goodness, highwayness. There was a good amount of fear in town, as you might expect, but the sightings were also creating something else that's lasted to this day: a reputation. The bar where Lorraine and Dritzy worked eventually created a menu item called the Silver Bullet Special. A bakery in town started making wolf-shaped cookies. Think Roswell, New Mexico, and UFO collectibles, but with wolves, and you'll get the idea. Even Chuck Coleman, a local state representative, got involved by using the Beast of Bray Road in his election campaign. Damn, that guy has balls. He ran an ad that showed a man dressed up as the Beast casting his vote for Coleman. Perhaps proof of the popularity of the Bray Beast stories, Coleman won the election. Doris Gibson's encounter also seemed to have been the last sighting of the creature by travelers on Bray Road. After that, Elkhorn, Wisconsin sort of became quiet, for a while at least. You see, in the spring of 1992, County Animal Control Officer John Fredrickson was called to a field outside of town, near Bray Road. This is a man who was used to the occasional roadkill or injured farm animal. He'd seen a lot in his career, but when he arrived at the field, he was well out of his depth, because there, lying in the pasture, were the bodies of 5 horses. Their throats had been slashed. We're drawn to animals. We always have been. And if the internet's collection of cat videos and dog tricks tell us anything, it's that our passion for these animals isn't fading anytime soon. Perhaps they meet a deep, unspoken need in our soul, or maybe they just trigger the right pleasure center in our brains. Whatever the reason might be, animals are significant to us. And every time I see someone dress up their dog in a sweater, I can't help but think of how, for a very long time, humans used to be the ones dressing up as animals. We envy their grace, their strength, and their power. And that envy has woven itself into the very fabric of global folklore. But what if there's another reason we tell stories of animals that act human? What if, deep down, we fear the possibility? Or what if our ancestors told just enough stories about human-like animals that we wonder, just a little? Whatever it was lurking in the trees in the shadows of Elkhorn, Wisconsin back in the 1980s and early 1990s remains a mystery to this day. No answers have been uncovered. No unexpected corpses have been found in the woods or along the roadside. No nests or dens or whatever sort of dwelling a creature like the Beast of Bray Road might live in. All we have is story. And sometimes all we ever have is story. All of the witnesses who came forward to tell their stories seem to agree on the details, and surprisingly, all of them appear to be telling the truth. When a documentary on the events was being produced in 2008, all of the witnesses agreed to take a polygraph exam. And each of them passed. It's not irrefutable proof, but it's enough to make you wonder. Sometime after the events of the early 1990s, a local who lived along Bray Road looked out his window to see a man standing in his driveway with a handgun. Obviously frightened by the sight of a stranger... Oh, I'm sorry. Obviously frightened by the sight of an armed stranger in his yard, he called the police, who quickly arrived. Jose Contreras was immediately arrested and his handgun, along with 50 rounds of ammunition, was confiscated. He eventually went to trial, and his lawyer attempted to build a case around self-defense. Contreras, he told the judge, was looking for the Beast of Bray Road, which he believed was a werewolf. That meant, according to his defense, he wasn't a danger to anyone else. The judge, though, dismissed the notion and convicted Contreras anyway. His reason? None of the bullets in the gun had been silver. Maybe it's fantasy. Maybe it's real. But it's amazing that, at the very least, how parts of fantasy can become so acceptable that they play a role in something as significant as a criminal trial. Here's a final tale. One night in October 2010, 6 people were driving together down Bray Road. On the road ahead, they watched as a shadow seemed to move across their path. As they drew closer, they watched a shape run into the open field to their right. What they say might seem hard to believe, so we'll take their word for it. They claimed it was an animal, covered in fur, and similar in appearance to a wolf. Except it was running on 2 legs, not 4. Once in the field, the beast dropped to all 4 and ran off. One detail sets this report apart from the others, though. Because unlike every other encounter mentioned here, this one finds a way to make the Beast of Bray Road even more frightening. According to the witnesses, it wasn't a single creature. There were 2 of them. Spooky. Okay, I need some tea. I'm getting crispy. Okay. The next story is titled Off the Path. Stretch? Okay, let me put my bookmark back in so I don't lose my place. I like Aaron Mahnke's writing style. Yes. Yes, it is Aaron Mahnke. I like it too. It kind of flows with my inner narrative, so it's easier to read than like some people who are just telling story for story's sake. Okay. I've spent most of my life in the presence of troubled sports teams. Growing up in the Chicago area, I was always aware of how long the Cubs had gone without winning a World Series title. It was less a point of pain and more of a dump. I'm not good with sports, I'm so sorry. It was less a point of pain and more a numb spot in the collective conscience of everyone around me. When I moved to Boston in the late 1990s, I discovered a similar culture, this time centered on the Red Sox. Again, there was a team that had spent decades waiting. Year after year, hope would be manufactured and piled high into the cart of expectations, only to have that cart dumped on its side at the end of each season. Until 2004, that is. That was the year things changed. That was the year in which the Tower of Hopelessness and Doubt, a tower that had taken 86 years to construct, brick by brick, year after year came crashing down. 12 years later, the Cubs experienced that very same change. The wait was over. I don't plan to talk about baseball anymore here, but I do think the story of teams like the Cubs and the Red Sox have something valuable to teach us about how our minds work. Our ability to justify, to explain, to make sense of what seems so often to make no sense at all. That's what I find fascinating. Humans are so very good at finding reasons. Lurking behind these seemingly endless droughts have been excuses. More specifically, the curses. How else are we to explain such droughts, such logic-defying gaps on their scorecards? Of course, both of those teams had to be cursed, right? But the curse of the Bambino and the curse of the Billy Goat weren't the first curses in history, and they were far from the last. And while some curses have been entertaining or even laughable, others have defied explanation long enough to make people wonder. Some, in fact, have even been deadly. The word curse comes from the Old English word curse. The original meaning isn't clear, but one of the uses of the Old English word is to denote a path or a route. I'm no etymologist, but I think the word picture is actually pretty clear. Life is like a journey. Sometimes we walk along the path of our choosing, and sometimes we're pushed off into the woods. It's in those moments of chaos, of the unexpected and the unfortunate, that we feel like we've lost control. It's as if someone or something has knocked us off the path that we're traveling. In those moments, it might be appropriate to say that we've been cursed. Curses as a concept, though, have been around since the beginning of humanity. In the earliest examples, a curse was a punishment handed out by a deity to misbehaving or devious human beings. The story of Adam and Eve in the Christian Bible is full of curses, doled out after their disobedience to God's instructions. Hard physical work, painful childbirth, and expulsion from paradise are all described as curses. The Irish speak of curses as if they were birds. Once a curse is spoken out loud, they say it can float around a place until it finds its target. If the intended receiver wasn't in the room, a curse could drift around for up to 7 years. Not aimlessly, though. A curse is like a heat-seeking missile, waiting until the moment when the person arrives. Incoming Scandinavia. In Scandinavia, curses are like bullets. A person might utter a curse at an enemy, but the curse can be turned back or returned to the speaker, who then suffers the effects of the curse. Think Harry Potter-style wand duels, if you will. The Moors of the Middle Ages have a very interesting tradition involving curses. It was said that if a man followed a prescribed set of rules and requirements, he was allowed to ask others to help him with something important. If, after jumping through all of the correct hoops, his request for help was still refused, a curse was said to descend upon those who refused him. Not a specific curse he made up, but a general societal curse, as if tradition itself were punishing the unhelpful people. According to legend, the Celtic people of Europe used curses in a powerful way. If a tenant farmer was fired and evicted from the land he had been hired to work, he would quickly go and gather stones from all over the property. Then he would put these stones in a lit fireplace, fall on his knees, and pray. What did he pray for exactly? Well, he prayed that for as long as the stones remained unburned, every possible curse would be descended upon his landlord, the landlord's children, and all the generations after them. Then, rather than leave the stones in the fireplace, where they could eventually become burned, thus ending the curse, he would gather them up and scatter them all around the countryside. Curses have been there since the beginning, it seems, but over time they have evolved to be more than just something you do to another person, as if they were weapons. Many of the stories that we tell on dark nights around campfires have more to do with the implications. You see, sometimes the horrible tragedies of life refuse to be explained away without the mention of a deadly curse. Can confirm, I've cursed a farm or two in my days. Cute, very cute. When Prince Amadeo of Savoy told his father in 1867 that he planned to marry Maria Vittoria dal Pozzo, his father was enraged. Sure, she was of noble birth, but she was no princess, and she certainly wasn't worthy of the son of a king. I need to get comfy, hold on. He was said to have cursed their union. On the morning of their wedding, Maria's dressmaker committed suicide. Maria took the hint and found a different dress to wear. Later, as the bridal party made their way to the palace church in a grand procession, one of the military leaders fell off his horse and died right there in the street. The wedding procession continued on, though, and finally reached the palace gates, only to find them shut. A quick inspection revealed the reason. The gatekeeper was found to be in the gatehouse, lying in a pool of his own blood. The death toll continued. Immediately after the wedding, the best man shot himself in the head. The wedding party headed to the train station, perhaps in an effort to outrun the curse, but when they arrived, the man who had drafted their marriage contract had a stroke and died on the spot. He was soon followed by the station master, who somehow got pulled under the royal train and was crushed to death. Jesus, this is such a bad wedding. It's such a horrible omen. Okay. The king apparently saw a pattern and recalled the entire party to the palace. While they were leaving the train, though, one of the noblemen fell beneath the same train car. A medallion on his chest, most likely a gift from the king, was pushed through his skin, stabbing him in the heart. Maria was the final victim of the curse, they say. She died in childbirth? She died in childbirth at the age of 29. Here's another. Timurlane, or Timurlane, as he was known, was the great-great-grandson of Genghis Khan, taking the throne in 1369. He was a vicious Mongol warlord and was known for bloody military campaigns. He often built pyramids after his victories, not with stone, mind you. No, he preferred to use the heads of the defeated army, sometimes tens of thousands of them. Childbirth. Listen, you try sitting here reading for an hour and a half straight and not get your words kind of mixed up sometimes. I'm gonna take a sip of tea because I feel a cough coming on. I'm honestly surprised I'm not better at this, but I also don't do it as often as I should. It's like a once a month kind of thing. Okay. He died in 1405, and I imagine more than a few people were elated at the news. He was buried in an area that we now know as Uzbekistan, and a large jade slab was placed over his tomb as a safeguard. The stone was inscribed with words of warning, though. When I arise from the grave, the world will tremble. Some reports say that another message referred to a great battle that would be unleashed should his grave be disturbed. You see where this is going, right? In 1941, Joseph Stalin sent a team of Soviet archaeologists to look for Timur's tomb. When local Uzbek elders heard of the search and planned excavation, they spoke out in protest. They made reference to an old book that made it clear just how bad an idea it was to open the tomb. They spoke of a curse, but no one listened. On June 21st, 1941, the tomb of Tamerlane was opened and his skull was removed. The following day, Hitler's forces crossed into the Soviet Union, beginning the largest German military operation of World War II. If that war had a great battle, this was it. The body of Tamerlane was studied for over a year while the Soviet Union was torn apart and destroyed by Hitler's armies. All told, the Soviet Union lost 26.6 million men and women to the invasion, more than any country in human history. It's unclear why, but in November of 1942, the Soviets decided to return Timur's body to the tomb, complete with a proper Islamic burial. Days later, the German invasion was repelled at Stalingrad, finally pushing the invaders back to the west and marking a turning point in the war. A turning point, some say, that was caused by the lifting of the curse. The idea of a curse is common throughout folklore, and many popular stories use it as a plot device. The cursed spinning wheel of Sleeping Beauty, Snow White's cursed apple, and the cursed brothers of the Seven Ravens all come to mind. But there's another example in Irish tradition that tops them all, however obscure it might be. There's an ancient Norse work called The King's Mirror that tells a fascinating story about St. Patrick. St. Patrick, of course, was known for his work spreading Christianity throughout Ireland in the 5th century, but he apparently did not always meet with success on his travels. Curse Nazi invasion. According to the account, St. Patrick once visited a clan that lived in the southern kingdom of Ireland called Ossory. Like any other visit, Patrick's mission was to bring his message of Christianity to the people there, but it appears that he struck out. The King's Mirror goes on to describe how the people of the clan made every effort they could to insult both Patrick and the god he represented. Patrick, to his credit, carried on and tried his best. He preached the message as he always did and followed the same protocol, meeting with the clan in their place of assembly, but the people there wouldn't hear him out. Instead, they did something that might seem incredibly odd to our modern ears. They howled like wolves. It's not that they laughed at him, and it happened to sound like howling. These people literally howled at St. Patrick. The reasoning was logical. The totem, or spirit animal, for this clan happened to be the wolf. To them, they were just responding to the message of an outside deity with the sounds of their own. Now, this was pretty unheard of for St. Patrick. The fact that this event was recorded in a Norse history book highlights just how remarkable it was. But even more unusual was Patrick's response to this stubborn, insulting clan. Clearly upset, Patrick stopped speaking and began to pray. He asked God to punish the people of the village for their stubbornness. He wasn't specific, but he asked for some form of affliction that would be communal, that would carry on through the generations as a constant reminder of their disobedience. According to the story, God actually listened. It was said that the people of Ossory were forever cursed to become the very thing they worshipped: wolves. And this curse followed a very specific set of rules. Every 7 years, one couple from the village of Ossory would be transformed into wolves. They would be stuck in this form day and night, year after year, until the next couple took over, transforming into wolves themselves and freeing the couple before them. Part of the curse was said to be how the people of Ossuary maintained their human minds while in the form of a wolf, but although they thought and spoke as humans, they were equally bound to the cravings of their new form, specifically the craving for human flesh. In this way, the curse affected everyone, from the man and woman transformed to the people around them who lived in constant fear of being attacked. Ever since that day, so the legend says, the people of Ossuary have been cursed. There's media hype, and then there's grasping at straws. For some people, declaring someone or something to be cursed adds an air of mystery and drama. It's the sexy bit, and sex sells, right? For example, the Kennedy family story is sad and tragic, but when we add a dash of curse, we elevate it to near mythic proportions. Other people, though, really do believe. Either they've experienced the sting of unexplainable misfortune, or they've watched the lives of people around them crumble for no discernible reason. The human mind wants answers. It demands them. It seeks them out. People love stories, but only the ones with closure. And that's what curses offer us. At the end of the day, curses help us make sense of a thing, person, or place that seems to be haunted by misfortune. They act like a walking stick for people who are having difficult time staying on the path. They prop us up and help us make sense of life. I can imagine that life in 6th century Ireland was incredibly difficult. It would make sense that eventually someone would begin to tell stories that try to explain the harshness of that life. Stories about a curse, perhaps. When someone failed to return from battle, or a hunting trip, or even travel between villages, it was hard not to have all the answers. Stories about attacks by local werewolves certainly did their part in explaining these disappearances. But they were just stories, right? Gerald of Wales was a 12th century historian who recorded something interesting. He had been sent to Ireland by King Henry II to record the area's history. According to him, a local priest requested his company while he was there. This priest sat down and told Gerald an amazing tale. According to the report, he had been traveling near the western border of County Meath, close to what would have been ancient Ossuary, and had camped for the night in the woods. That night, with his fire burning low, someone approached from the darkness beyond the firelight and spoke to him. Obviously, the priest was frightened, as he thought he was alone, but the voice of a man called out to him with great urgency. The man spoke of his wife, who was sick at home. He was worried and wondered if this man of God might come and perform the last rites for her. Reluctantly, the priest agreed. He gathered up his belongings and followed the voice into the woods. They traveled a short distance until they came to a large hollow tree. There, the priest noticed two frightening things. First, there was something, or someone, laying inside the tree, presumably the sick wife. Second, though, he realized that the voice was coming not from a man at all, but from a wolf. He was taken aback. How, he asked the wolf, was he able to speak like a man? The wolf's answer was simple. Centuries before, his people had been cursed by a traveling priest, forever doomed to become wolves. The priest prayed over the man's wife and tended to her illness. The couple was gone by morning, never to be seen again. St. Patrick really did screw up an entire town. I take it you're at work, Venus? I like how he mentions the human need for explanations and understanding. Could this all be an incredibly unlucky coincidence, or was it a curse? The curse explanation is more appealing than recognizing a lot of things as just pure chance. I agree. Yep, at work, I figured. I very much hope that story time doesn't make you sleepy, because I still have like an hour and a half to go. We have like 32 pages in this section still. curse version, a lot more fun and sexy, as he called it. 90 while minutes. Hello, Bolo. 90 while? 90 more? I'm recording, so anything that you missed I will post onto YouTube. "90 whole minutes. Ah, I understand. 90 weenus minutes. Wow, that's a lot of weenuses. And despite that, we haven't really... I'm gonna be falling asleep at work. I'm so sorry. Wait, you're at work right now? Isn't it late? Does Bolo work nighttime? Bolo works the streets. New lore. I had coffee and matcha today. I did do a 58-hour week last week. That sucks. It's a nice lazy Sunday for me. Welder at day, stripper at night. Ugh, God, stop! I can only get so erect. Okay. The Beast Within. Ask anyone in the mental health profession about full moons, and you'll get a surprising answer. Something that sounds incredibly like folklore and myth. A full moon has the power to bring out the crazy in many people. What I do at night is my business, and the business of people who give me dollar notes. I understand. We've believed this for a long time. We refer to unstable people as lunatics, a word that finds its roots in Latin. It's built from the root word luna, which means moon. For centuries, humans have operated under the conviction that certain phases in the lunar cycle can cause people to lose touch with reality. Just ask the parents of a young child, and they'll tell you tales of wild behavior and out-of-the-ordinary disobedience during particular phases of the moon. Science tells us that just as the moon's pull on the ocean creates tides that rise and fall in severity, so too does our planet's first satellite tug on the water inside our bodies, changing our behavior. Today we talk about the full moon. When we talk about the full moon, we tend to joke about this insane, extraordinary behavior. But maybe we joke to avoid the deeper truth, an idea that we are both frightened and embarrassed to entertain. For most of us, you see, the full moon conjures up an image that is altogether unnatural and unbelievable. That large, glowing, perfect circle in the night sky makes us think of just one thing: werewolves. Did you never make that connection, Venus? Anywho, science has tried to explain our obsession with the werewolf many times over the years. One theory is a disease called hypertrichosis, also sometimes known as wolfitis. It is a condition of excessive unusual body hair growth, oftentimes covering a person's entire face. Think Michael J. Fox in Teen Wolf. Psychologists actually had an official diagnosis in the 4th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders called clinical lycanthropy. It's defined as a delusional syndrome in which the patient believes they can transform into an animal. Those changes take place only in their mind, of course. But delusions have to start somewhere. People who believe they are Napoleon Bonaparte have some previous knowledge of who he was. I think it's fair to assume that those who suffer from clinical lycanthropy have heard of werewolves before. It's actually pretty easy to bump into the myth thanks to modern popular culture. Werewolves have been featured in, or at least appeared in, close to 100 Hollywood films since 1913. One of the earliest mentions of something resembling the modern werewolf can be found in the 2,000-year-old writings of the Roman poet Virgil. In his Eclogue 9, written in 40 BCE, he described a man named Maurus who could transform himself into a wolf using herbs and poisons. About 50 years later, Gaius Petronius wrote a satirical novel called, appropriately, Satyricon, which I think is basically the equivalent of Stephen King's writing a horror novel called Frightycon. Oh gosh, I'm having trouble reading. It's only been an hour and a half. Okay, hold on. In it, he tells the tale of a man named Niceros. In the story, Niceros was traveling with a friend when that friend suddenly took off his clothes, urinated in a circle, and transformed into a wolf before running off towards a large field of sheep. The next day, Niceros is told by the owner of the sheep that one of the shepherds stabbed a wolf in the neck with a pitchfork. Later that day, Niceros notices his friend had a similar wound on his own neck. In the Greek myth of the god Zeus and an Arcadian king named Lycaon, Zeus took on the form of a human traveler. At one point in his journey, he visited Arcadia, and during his time in that country, he visited their royal court. King Lycaon somehow recognized Zeus for who he truly was and tried, in true Greek form, of course, to kill him by serving him a meal of human flesh. Apparently, that's how you kill a god. Hold on, rubbing my eye. But Zeus was a smart guy, and he caught Lycaon in the act, throwing the mythological equivalent of a temper tantrum. He destroyed the palace, killed all 50 of the king's sons with lightning bolts, and then cursed King Lycaon himself. To punish, King Lycaon would be doomed to spend the rest of his life as a wolf, presumably because wolves were known for attacking and eating humans. Most scholars believe that it is this legend that gives birth to the term lycanthropy, lykos, meaning the Greek word for wolf, and anthropos, for the word human. That's a temper tantrum. Wolves aren't just a Greco-Roman thing, though. In the 13th century, the Norse recorded their mythological origins in something called the Volsunga Saga. Despite their culture being separated from the Greeks by thousands of miles and many centuries, there are tales of werewolves present there as well. One of the stories in the Volsunga Saga involves a father and son pair, Sigmund and Sinfjotli. I am not Scandinavian. During their travels, the two men came upon a hut in the woods where they found 2 enchanted wolf skins. These skins had the power to change the wearer into a wolf, giving them all of the characteristics that the beast was known for: power, speed, and cunning. The catch, according to the saga, was that once put on, the wolf pelt could be taken off only every 10 days. Undeterred, the father and son each put on one of the wolf skins and transformed into the beasts. They decided to split up and go hunting in their new forms, but they made an agreement that if either of them encountered a party of men over a certain number, and most translations say that number was 7, they then were supposed to howl for the other to come join them in the hunt. Scandinavia mentioned, yes. I remember a girl once told me that full moons bring out the crazy in people. I thought that was one of the silliest things I've ever heard. Apparently, it's deep-rooted. It is. It's very deep-rooted in folklore. Ask anyone that works in a, what's it called? In an emergency room. You will never have a dull night on a full moon. There is moon sickness. I don't know if it mentions it in the story. Sigmund's son, however, broke his promise, killing off a hunting party of 11 men. When Sigmund discovered this, he fatally injured his son. Thankfully, the Norse god Odin intervened and healed the son, and both men took off the pelts and burned them. So, from the very beginning, werewolves were a supernatural thing, a curse, a change in the very nature of humanity. They were ruled by cycles of time and feared by those around them. Fun lore about me. I sleep rather well during a full moon. Okay, I'm gonna get up and walk around. Because my feet are numb. But my headset's on. Consider this a stretch because I needed it. Thank you. I literally walked away from my computer to stretch. So, you gave me a reason to do so. Things get interesting when we go to Germany, though. In 1582, the country of Germany was being pulled apart by a war between Catholics and Protestants. And one of the towns that played host to both sides was a small town of Bedburg. Keep in mind that in this era there were also still outbreaks of the Black Death, so this was an age of conflict and violence. People understood loss. They had become numb to it, and it would take something incredibly extraordinary to surprise them. I'm MVP, I know. Yes. First, there were cattle mutilations. Farmers from the area surrounding Bedburg would find dead cattle in their fields. It started off infrequently but grew to a daily occurrence, something that went on for many weeks. Cows that had been sent out to pasture were found torn apart. It was as if a wild animal had attacked them. Naturally, the farmers assumed it was wolves. But it didn't stop there. Children began to go missing. Young women vanished from the main roads around Bedburg. In some cases, their bodies were never found, but those that had been found had been mauled by something horribly violent. Finding your cattle disemboweled is one thing, but when it's your child or your wife, it can cause panic and fear, and the community spiraled into absolute hysteria. When we think of historical European paranoia, we often think of witchcraft. The 15th and 16th centuries were filled with witch hunts, burnings, hangings, and an overwhelming hysteria that even spread across the Atlantic to the British colonies, where it destroyed more lives. The witch trials of Salem, Massachusetts are the most famous example. But at the same time, Europe was also on fire with fears of werewolves. Some historians think that in France alone, some 30,000 people were accused of being werewolves, and some were even executed for it, either by hanging or by being burned at the stake. The fear of werewolves was real. For the town of Bedburg, it was very real. One report from this event tells of 2 men and a woman who were traveling just outside the city walls. They heard a voice call out to them for help from the trees beside the road, and one of the men stepped into the trees to give assistance. When the man did not return, the second man entered the woods to find him, and he also did not return. The woman caught on and attempted to run, but something exited the woods and attacked her. The bodies of the men were later found mangled and torn, but the woman's was never found. Later, villagers found severed limbs in the fields near Bedburg, limbs from the people who were missing. It was clear something horrible was hunting people in the area. Another report tells of a group of children playing in a field near cattle. As they played, something ran into the field and grabbed a small girl by the neck before trying to tear her throat out. But the high collar of her dress saved her life, and she managed to scream. Cows don't like screaming, apparently, and they began to stampede. Frightened by the cattle, the attacker let the girl free and ran for the forest. This was the last straw for the people of Bedburg. They took the hunt to the beast. According to a pamphlet from 1589, the men of the town hunted for the creature for days. Accompanied by dogs and armed for killing, these brave men ventured into the forest and finally found their quarry. Interestingly, though, they claimed that they had spotted a wolf, not a man, and quickly chased it down. In the end, it was their dogs that cornered the beast. Dogs are fast, and they beat the men to their prey. When the hunters did finally arrive, they found the creature cornered. According to the pamphlet, the wolf transformed into a man right before their eyes. While the wolf had been just another beast, the man was someone they recognized. It was a wealthy, well-respected farmer from the town named Peter Stubb, whose name is sometimes recorded as Peter Stump. Stubb confessed all, and his story seemed to confirm their darkest fears. He told them that he had made a pact with the devil at the age of 12. The deal? In exchange for his soul, the devil would give him a plethora of worldly pleasures. But like most stories, a greedy heart is difficult to satisfy. Stubb admitted to being a wicked fiend with a desire for wrong and destruction, and he acknowledged that he was inclined to blood and cruelty. To sate the thirst, the devil had given him a magical belt of wolf skin. Putting it on, he claimed, would transform him into a monstrous shape of a wolf. Sound familiar? He told the men who had captured him that he had taken off the belt in the forest, and some were sent back to retrieve it, but it was never found. Still, superstition and fear drove them to torture and interrogate the man, who confessed to decades of horrible, unspeakable crimes. Stubb told his captors that he would often walk through Bedburg and wave to the families and friends of those he had killed. It delighted him that none of them suspected he was the killer. Sometimes he would use these walks to pick out future victims, planning how he would get to them outside the city walls, where he could ravish and cruelly murder them. Stubb admitted to going on killing sprees simply because he took pleasure in the bloodshed. He would kill lambs and goats and eat their raw flesh. He even claimed to have eaten unborn children ripped straight from the mother's wombs. The human mind is always solving problems, even when we are asleep and unaware of it. The world is full of things that don't always sit right with us, and in our attempt to deal with life, we rationalize. In more superstitious times, it was easy to lean on old fears and legends. The tuberculosis outbreaks of the 1800s led people to truly believe that the dead were sucking the life out of people. The stories that gave birth to the vampire mythology also provided people with a way to process the existence of a disease such as TB and its horrible symptoms. Perhaps the story of the werewolf shows us that same phenomenon, but in reverse. Rather than creating stories that help explain the mysteries of death, perhaps we create stories of the werewolf to help justify the horrors of life as human nature. The tale of Peter Stubb sounds terrible, but when you hold it up to accounts of modern-day serial killers such as Jeffrey Dahmer or Richard Trenton Chase, it's par for the course. The difference between them and Stubb is simply 400 years of modernization. With the advent of electric lights pushing away the darkness and global exploration exposing much of the world's fears as just myth, it has become more and more difficult to blame our flaws on monsters. The beast, it turns out, has been inside of us the whole time. And Peter Stubb? The people of Bedburg executed him for his crimes on October 31st, 1589. Halloween, mind you. He was given what was thought to be a fair and just punishment. He was strapped spread eagle and naked to a large wooden wheel, and then his skin was peeled off with red-hot pincers. They then broke his arms and legs with the blunt end of an axe before finally turning the blade over and chopping off his head. His body was burned at the stake in front of the entire town, and then his torture wheel was mounted on a tall pole, topped with a statue of a wolf. On top of that, they placed his severed head. Justice, or just one more example of the cruelty of mankind. Perhaps in the end, we're really all monsters, aren't we? Hello, Soul. Today you look like the maiden Troy would rebuild itself and go to war again. Hi, Ice. Thank you. They really did work through some of their problems on him. Are you okay, Ice? You're normally here very early, and you haven't even gotten your timely yet. I haven't gotten my timely yet. That being said, I'm gonna get my timely. Gaming. Hunger pains. One of the most chilling historical events of the last 200 years, one that has fascinated me for most of my life, is the 1846 pioneer journey of the families and employees of James Reed and George Donner. I can't think of a last name that evokes as much emotion, as much fear, and as much instant visual imagery as Donner. In the years since that fateful winter, that name has become synonymous with mountain passes, frozen bodies huddled around dead campfires, and of course, cannibalism. The Donner story has a way of stopping us in our tracks. We are morbidly fascinated with their tragic journey, but even more so, we're amazed at how far they went to stay alive. Their story forces us to look straight into the face of fear that most people bury deep beneath the surface. People eating other people. We can look for justification. We can research the reasons behind their situation and write sterile and safe papers about the horrible plights they found themselves in. But at the end of the day, we are simply and powerfully horrified. From the story of Hansel and Gretel to the modern television show Hannibal, we have always maintained a repulsive fascination with those who cross the line. We can't stand to think about it, and yet we can't look away either. Maybe it has to do with the morbid symbolism of one body within another body. Perhaps it's the realization that, like cattle or wild game, humans can sometimes become food for something or someone else. Or perhaps, deep down, we're fascinated with cannibalism because we believe maybe, just maybe, it could turn us into monsters. If people don't want to be eaten, they should look so scrumptious. Ice, you know that you are 100% clear to send me messages if you ever need anything. I may not be able to do much, but I can listen and I can be there for you so that you don't feel like you're completely alone. Humans have been confronted with cannibalism for a very long time. Archaeologists have discovered signs of the act that date back tens of thousands of years. In some instances, the reasons have clearly been ritualistic, while other situations have been driven by food shortages. There's a lot we still don't know, but what we do understand has highlighted the fact that, long ago, it was far more common than it is today. In the realm of ancient history, Greek and Roman historians recorded instances related to war and conquest. The Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, for example, resulted in scattered reports of cannibalism. Decades later, when the Romans attacked Numantia, historians in Alexandria recorded similar stories. One interesting observation is that, over the centuries, the accusation of cannibalism has been a political and colonial tool. The ancient Greeks assumed that all non-Hellenistic peoples were barbarians and cannibals, and used that assumption to justify their hostility towards them. For many empires, even up through the British Empire of the 17th and 18th centuries, it's a way to demonize a group of people and to grant themselves permission to come in and take over that group's territory, to bring the gift of civilization, so to speak. But the assumption led to deep prejudice against these peoples. One example from 1820 stands out. That was the year a whaling ship called the Essex was rammed and sunk by one of the whales it was pursuing. If that sounds familiar at all, it's because the story went on to inspire the novel Moby Dick. After the accident, the captain and crew of 21 boarded 3 of their whaleboats. They had 2 choices of route for safety. All 3,000 miles against sail 3,000 miles against the wind to Chile, or half of that distance with the wind to the Marquesas Islands. But the Marquesans were rumored to be cannibals, so they took the longer route. As a result, the crew spent months at sea and eventually resorted to cannibalism to survive. Reality can be cruel and ironic, apparently, but something darker sits at the center of many cannibalism stories. At the core of almost all Native American cultures across Canada and the northern portion of what is now the United States, there are stories of supernatural effects that eating other humans can have on a person. Each tribe seems to refer to the stories with different terms, but they are all eerily similar. Wabanaki legends speak of a man eating snow giant, the Giwakwa. The Cree tell tales of the Wetiko, also a giant and also a man-eater. The Mi'kmaq tribes of northern Maine up through Nova Scotia tell stories of the Chino, creatures that were once human but were transformed through some horrible crime, usually cannibalism. And the most common name for these creatures among Native Americans, however, is one we already know from popular culture. I'm not going to say this name, but I will spell it out for you. This is the Wendigo, a creature that was once human but was transformed by its hunger for human flesh into a monster that can't ever be satisfied. I really don't want to say this name. One Native American description of the creatures claims that one of these creatures is taller than a grown man, with a gaunt body and dead skin that seems to be pulled too tightly over its bones. Tales speak of the tangle of antlers upon its head, and deep eye sockets that seemed to be dead inside, and it smelled of death and decay. In Cree mythology, though, this creature was simply a human who had become possessed by an evil spirit. The spirit would take over a person, a neighbor, a friend, a sister, a son, and then turn its hunger and hatred towards the people around it. There was no hope for those who were transformed into man-eating creatures. Only one solution was available. These creatures must be hunted and killed. It's fantasy. It's a cultural meta-narrative about something else, something deeper. At least that's what the anthropologists tell us. And some have taken those legends at face value. Swift Runner was a Native American from the Cree tribe who lived in the western portion of Canada. He was born in the early 1800s and worked as a hunter and trapper in the country north of Fort Edmonton, as well as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. He was a big man, standing over 6 feet tall, and according to the reports, he was well-liked and respected among his people. He had a wife and 6 children. It was said that he was a loving father who cared deeply for his family, which is why the winter of 1787 will be remembered as a tragedy. According to the reports, Swift Runner stumbled into a Catholic mission in St. Albert sometime in the spring of 1879. He was distraught and unfocused. He told the priest there that the winter had been harsh and that his entire family had starved to death. He was, in fact, the only one to make it out alive. But something didn't sit right with the priests. For one thing, Swift Runner didn't look like a man who had endured starvation throughout the winter month. He was a solid 200 pounds and seemed healthy and strong. Another hint that all was not well were his nightmares, which often ended with him screaming. In the end, the priests reached out to the mounted police. A group of investigators was dispatched to look into the matter, and they took Swift Runner back to his winter camp. To his credit, Swift Runner was helpful. He immediately showed the men a small grave near his campsite and explained that it was the grave of one of his boys. They even went as far as to open the grave, and everything lined up with the story. There were the bones of a child, and it was safe to assume the child was Swift Runner's. But then the police discovered other clues that began to paint a darker picture. Around the camp in scattered locations began to uncover more and more bones, and a skull. Not just a few either. There were bones everywhere. Some of the larger bones were hollow and snapped in half, clearly the result of someone sucking the marrow out. They also found bits of hair and flesh. The evidence began to pile up, and they looked to Swift Runner for an explanation. And that's when he told him the truth. According to him, a WENDIGO spirit came to their camp during the winter. It spoke to him and told him to eat his family. At first, he resisted, ignoring the voice, but slowly over time the creature took control, and then it took action. Swift Runner's wife was the first to die, then one of the younger boys. One by one, his family was killed and eaten. Then the creature moved on to his mother-in-law and his own brother. To Swift Runner, it was cold fact. A monster had eaten his family. The police agreed. The police agreed. What they disagreed on was the identity of the monster. The mutilated human remains were collected and transported to Fort Saskatchewan, along with Swift Runner himself. His trial began on August 8, 1879, and it was about as cut and dried as it could be. Both the judge and the jury refused to accept the story of the creature. They saw the man as a murderer and sentenced him to be hanged. More than 60 people gathered at the fort on December 20th to watch the hanging. One witness to the execution, a man who had reportedly seen several hangings in his life, was said to have slapped his thigh and declared, "Boys, that was the prettiest hanging I have ever seen." In Severn River in Ontario, winds through the homeland of the Severn River in Ontario winds through the homeland of the Sandy Lake First Nation. This area of Canada is so isolated that it wasn't until the early decades of the 20th century that the Western world really made the effort to reach out and connect with the people who lived there. It's way up in the far western corner of Ontario, in the kind of territory where lakes have islands that have their own lakes. By the late 1800s, the Hudson Bay Company had closed down enough of its trading posts that the closest one to Sandy Lake was more than 140 miles away. That was a 50-hour walk across rough terrain. I'm not really sure that isolated is a strong enough word. This place was practically alien. Jack Fiddler was born in the 1830s, or maybe it was the 1840s. People aren't really sure. But we know that he was a Cree Indian and that he worked as a trader. He made the trek between the villages and the trading posts for a living, and in the process met a lot of people. I lost my place. Oh. He was the son of one of the Sandy Lake people's shaman, and over his lifetime he had 5 wives and many, many children. When Jack's family died in 1891, Jack took over as the leader of the Sandy Lake people. That sounds fancy, but in reality there was only about 120 people living in his community. He had influence on the wider geographical area too, but his real power came from his role as the tribal shaman. A shaman's power were a vital part of his leadership. When Jack became the spiritual leader of his people, he became the keeper of their ancient traditions and their guardian against the approaching darkness that was Western civilization. There are even legends that tell of Jack Fiddler curing illness. But most important, Jack became the first and only defense against the Wendigos. I'm gonna call it the creatures from now on. Hold on. Okay, that'll be up for 20 minutes. It shouldn't take me 20 minutes to finish the story, but just in case. I'm not going to say that name. Okay. First and only defense against the creatures, often called on to hunt down and kill them. I know, this sounds like the stuff of comic books or Hollywood movies, but Jack Fiddler lives up to the hype. In fact, over his lifetime, he claimed to have defeated 14 of the monsters. I don't like saying the other term for flesh pedestrian because of being a folklorist myself. It causes a visceral emotional reaction. So both the creature and flesh pedestrians are things that I don't like saying. I was reading too fast to catch myself and stop myself from saying it the first time, which is why I like physically shook. But those are the two things that I don't like mentioning. I've read a lot of stuff. My brain is just like, don't speak it into reality. I am very sorry. Okay, But Jack didn't go looking for a tall, monstrous creature with antlers and a bony body. No, he understood the creature to be more subtle. Some of the creatures, Jack said, had been sent to attack his people by other shamans. Others had been members of his own tribe who seemed to have been overtaken by an unstoppable urge to eat human flesh. When it was his own people, Jack said that he and his brother Joseph were the ones called on to do the hard thing and kill the individuals. But merely killing them wasn't enough to stop the possession. You see, it was believed that the creature's spirit could actually hop from one body to the next, so those who died as a result of their possession were often burned to stop the infection from spreading. For the Sandy Lake people, and many of their other Native American tribes that cover much of the northern half of North America, the creature stories were more than hearsay. It was an idea that was rooted in ancient tradition. Ceremonies were built around the legend. People were warned and educated constantly about the dangers this creature could pose to the community. And then, suddenly, all of that tradition and history ran headlong into the modern world, and the results were disastrous. Sometime in 1905, Joseph Fiddler's daughter-in-law was brought to Jack's village. She was very sick according to multiple first-hand accounts. She was in severe pain that drove her to cry out and moan constantly. Some of the women tending to her would even hold her down to keep her under control. Jack and his brother Joseph were brought in. They were both old men by now, both in their 80s and very frail, but they knew what was causing her illness, and they knew how to stop it. They had done this many times before, so they did what they did best. They took a thin rope, looped it around her neck, and then, slowly, tightened it. It wasn't done in cold blood. It was a calculated decision that these men came to only after deep discussion. It was driven by fear. If the creature spirit inside her had been allowed to take control, there was no telling how destructive it might have become. To them, this was preventative. It was mercy, a form of euthanasia that protected the entire community. The fiddlers were were mere instruments in the hands of a culturally driven. So sorry, I messed that up. Were mere instruments in the hands of a culture driven by superstition. Witnesses testified to their quiet, dignified nature, but it didn't help. The men were brought before a six-person jury later that year. The Toronto newspaper printed sensational headlines about the trial, inveighing against devil worship and murder, and in response, people around the country clamored for a conviction. And the Fiddler brothers were guilty, without question. These men had killed a member of their family. It might not have been a crime of passion, but they were still murderers. So when the verdict came down, it was far from a surprise. Guilty. The Cree people of Sandy Lake lost their leader. They lost two of the most respected elders of their tiny community. And, most frightening to them, they lost their last remaining creature. Hunters. Sorry, I couldn't make that sentence sound better. Real or not, these men had been a wall that kept the darkness and fear at bay. And now that wall was gone. Superstition has often served to answer our questions and calm our fears. From the changelings of Ireland to the vampires of New England, the stories we tell have helped us explain the mysteries we don't understand. That's not all superstition does, though. Blah. That's not all superstition does, I know, but it makes up a lot of the examples we find. We fear the unknown and will come up with something to explain it away. Cannibalism is something that humans have feared for a very, very long time. Not because we're convinced that it could change us into supernatural monsters. No, it's at the root of it all. Cannibalism is just a line that we don't think we should cross, and rightly so. History is littered with examples of people who have crossed the line. It wasn't because their life was at risk, or because they had no choice, but because of something darker. Deep belief in the folklore of their upbringing, mental instability, premeditated violence. Whatever the reason, every example reveals humans to be true monsters, capable of anything. Even the things we fear the most. Maybe Jack Fiddler understood this. Perhaps he knew that he represented the final entry in a vital ancient lineage. He saw a world ill-equipped to defend itself against the evils he had fought all his life. I have to imagine that the idea of it exhausted him. On September 30th, 1907, while on a walk outside with a police constable, Jack escaped into the woods, where he strangled himself with the sash he wore. His brother would later die in prison from tuberculosis. More than a century later, on July 30th, 2008, a man named Tim McLean was riding a Greyhound bus along the Trans-Canada Highway in Manitoba when one of the other passengers attacked and killed him. The man, Vince Waigwang, did more than kill McLean, though. He stabbed him, beheaded him, and then proceeded to cannibalize the body. Was the killer just insane? Or did he perhaps meet an evil spirit on the trip through the creature's country? That's a question that would be impossible to answer for certain, but the courts ruled in favor of insanity. In the end, he was committed to a high-security mental institution in Manitoba, but he stayed there for less than a decade. In May 2015, he was released back into society. Thank you for the lurk, Michelle. I appreciate you. Imagine taking a Greyhound bus just to have someone decide you're not gonna get to where you're supposed to go and just eat you on the bus. Okay, as I said, this is just gonna go up until I'm... I just want to unpin it. It didn't take me the full 20 minutes. I love Aaron Mahnke. He's like, look at these simpletons doing messed up shit out of fear. I laid down in bed, by the way. I'm glad. Give me just a sec. I've had a lot of liquid because I've been reading a lot. I'm gonna pee and then we will keep reading. Just say something out of pocket. Oh, I saw what the out of pocket thing was. I wish someone would eat me on a bus. I mean, what? Oh, Dev is like, what the fuck? Okay, hopefully I don't have to mention things that make me uncomfy anymore. If I do, I will come up with something to use as an in-between. It is very par for the course. You are so right. And I love how you just made a joke about almost being 40, and then you use the panda looking over a newspaper. I think that works so very well. Okay. This story is titled A Deep Fear. Hello, voice crack? At the height of the Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, the American Navy was using audio technology to detect Soviet submarines. I'm gonna try to not read chat so I don't laugh. These high-powered underwater microphones could detect unusual sounds from hundreds, even thousands of miles away, helping the military peer far into the depths of the ocean. After the Cold War ended, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration built on to that old microphone system with the hope of gaining a new understanding of the massive unexplored world beneath the ocean waves. They studied ambient sounds, geophysical noise, and bioacoustics, the sounds that ocean creatures make. But in 1997, they encountered a sound that defied explanation. Is this the bloop? Sorry, I may have just spoiled. A very low frequency, very powerful sound. So powerful that it was picked up by their microphone system from more than 3,000 miles away. Oh, and H.P. Lovecraft fans might get a kick out of the location they pinpointed. It's roughly 900 miles from the location of the mythical island city, Relay, where Cthulhu is imprisoned, waiting and dreaming. It didn't help that, at the time, the NOAA deemed the sound to be neither man-made nor geological. It seemed to be organic, with a signal that varied too much to be mechanical. Today, scientists lean towards another theory, that it's the sound of icebergs scraping the ocean floor. Many people still wonder what bloop, as they called it, really was. We wonder because there's something dark and mysterious about the ocean. Even after centuries of exploration, we've mapped only about 5% of the ocean floor. It's crazy, but we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about roughly 70% of our own planet. There's so much darkness, so much that's unknown, and that leaves us feeling a bit uneasy. We fear the unknown because it's full of questions. Questions are risky. They're dangerous. They prevent us from settling in and feeling comfortable. And the ocean is full of questions. But according to some, there's a very good reason to be afraid. One of the endearing features of many early European maps is the inclusion of tiny little sketches sprinkled throughout the ocean. Sketches of beastly green heads protruding from the waves, or long lashing tails reaching out for a nearby vessel. You won't find them on navigational maps from the time, but they were a common feature of the decorative maps created for aristocratic homes. Most maps were, above all, entertainment. But there were enough stories told by reputable people to give these decorative maps a bit of credibility. One example would be the map drawn around 1530 by Olaus Magnus. He was the Catholic Archbishop of Sweden, although with being a well-respected historian in his day. So when his map of Norway showed the waters off the coast to be packed with sea monsters, people believed him. In fact, when Conrad Gessner published the 4th volume of his Historia Animalium in 1558, sort of a collection of all-known sea creatures, he included a number of sketches from Magnus's map. To him, and to a lot of other people, they were real. It's not entirely their fault, though. Humans have been telling stories of the mysterious creatures of the ocean for a very long time. Almost 24 centuries ago, Aristotle wrote about a creature he called the Tethos, a gigantic, monstrous squid. Centuries later, right in Magnus's backyard, the Norwegian who lived near and traveled through the waters around Norway and Greenland spoke of the kraken. It's a name based on the Norwegian word krake or crake, one of the two, which refers to an unhealthy animal or a creature that's unusually twisted. It's a meaning that fits perfectly with the notion of a mysterious sea monster. And so, for a long while, if it was mysterious and dangerous and beneath the waves, it was a kraken. A lot of these old stories can be explained away with an understanding of just how little people really knew about the ocean in the 14th century. When a sailor landed on an island and found the decomposing corpse of a giant oarfish on the sand, he didn't say, "Hey, it's an oarfish." No, he framed the unusual sight through the lens of folklore. It was big and serpent-like, so naturally it was a sea serpent, or a hydra, or a kraken. You get the idea. Of course, modern science has given us a better understanding of the ocean. We know more than Olaus Magnus ever did. We know that the giant squid is a very real, very large creature, although it's taken us a very long time to prove that. In fact, it wasn't photographed live in the water until 2004, and it took another 2 years before it was ever filmed. The kraken isn't the only ancient sea creature to be debunked by science. On January 9th, 1493, Columbus reported sighting something remarkable in the waters off the coast of Hispaniola: 3 mermaids. They are not, he wrote, as beautiful as they are painted, since in some ways they have a face like a man. Folklore had always portrayed mermaids as part woman, part fish. For thousands of years, humans have been obsessed with the idea of human-fish hybrid creatures. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the ancient Greeks all told stories about them, as did cultures from Africa, China, India, and Europe. History, if you will pardon the pun, is swimming with mermaids. Sailors who were notoriously superstitious tried to avoid them. They were viewed by some as bad omens, signs that tragedy was about to strike. But the mermaids that Christopher Columbus sighted in 1493 were likely nothing more than a group of manatees, a large aquatic mammal that's fairly common near the coastlines around the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. They have fish-like tails, arms like flippers, and, being mammals, pectoral mammary glands. From a distance, and viewed through a few feet of water, they tick all the boxes. But not everything can be explained away so easily. Sometimes the stories are simply too numerous, too detailed, and too documented to be brushed aside. Some stories hold on tight long after others have caved in under scientific scrutiny, and no tale from the sea, at least in America, has held on longer than the one that began in New England nearly 400 years ago. If it's true, it's more than intriguing. It's downright chilling. Hold on, oh, thank you. I was gonna do it, but thank you. In the early days of British settlement of the New World, colonies were often approached as investment opportunities. Financial supporters in England would front the money to hire colonists, buy supplies, and launch the mission. You might think of it on the same level as a privately funded human mission to Mars, except for the early colonists, there was profit to be made. In 1623, a private company was formed in Dorchester, England, with the goal of establishing a profitable colony in North America. Later that year, the expedition landed on the area north of Boston known as Cape Ann, and the colonists got to work. But life in this new land was tough, and within 2 years their funding was pulled. 5 years later, in 1628, new money and new settlers arrived. Things were looking up. Within 2 years, progress there was successful enough to warrant sending more colonists. In the decade between 1630 and 1640, more than 10,000 brave souls weathered the Atlantic crossing to start a new life on the northern coast of modern-day Massachusetts. And more people means more observers. More eyes on this strange new land full of indigenous people, strange animals, and unknown threats. Fear is a spark that's fanned by large crowds. And in the right setting, it can engulf a culture. And that's just what happened in Gloucester. The first spark was recorded by John Jocelyn, a traveler from England. Jocelyn was a keen observer of the natural world and would later go on to publish his adventures in 2 separate books in the late 1600s. A few days after a ship entered port in the summer of 1648, one of the colonists told him a most extraordinary tale. A serpent, the man told him, had been seen on the rocks on the northern tip of Cape Ann. This gentleman described the serpent as an enormous snake, and claimed that it would slither up out of the waters of the Atlantic to coil up there on the rocks. Other colonists had witnessed it as well. Once, he said, a boat was sailing near the area with 4 men aboard, 2 English settlers and 2 Native Americans. When the Englishmen saw the serpent moving through the water, one of them raised the musket and fired at it. But one of the Native Americans placed his hand on the barrel and gently told him to fire at it. But one of the Native Americans placed his hand on the barrel and gently told him to stop. It was too risky, he said. If the shot didn't instantly kill it, they would all be in danger. In 1641, another man, Obadiah Turner, sighted the serpent in the vicinity of Gloucester. He described it as more than 90 feet long, with black eyes set in a horse-shaped head, and said that his report could be backed up by a number of other settlers. He wasn't the last either. For decades, rumor blew across the cold, harsh coastline like a stiff, cold wind. That's how a lot of folklore works. There are a handful of experiences, and they give birth to a wider story. Story, as we all know, spreads like water. It flows and seeps and has a way of reaching through barriers. Given enough time, story, like water, will leave its mark and transform a place. And Gloucester was certainly being transformed. 1.5 centuries later, on August 6, 1817, 2 women were walking near the inner harbor of Gloucester when they saw something moving through the water, as if following the tide inland from the sea. They stopped to watch it for a moment before realizing exactly what it was that they were looking at. It was a serpent. A monstrously large serpent, too large to be anything they might typically see in the waters there. Naturally, they were frightened and they shared their story with others. 4 days later, on August 10th, others had a similar experience. Susan Strover was walking with her father when both of them saw the creature in the water. They described the body as long and serpent-like and said that its head was long, like that of a dog or a horse. That very same day, Lydia Wanson had her own sighting, except when she saw the serpent, it was coiled up in the water's edge. When it uncoiled itself, Wanson claims it was nearly 70 feet long. More sightings followed. A local man, Amos Story, claimed to have watched the serpent for at least half an hour. He only saw portions of it as it moved through the waves, but his reaction was awe and fear. Henry Rowe, along with his sons, had multiple sightings that week. On August 12th, Solomon Allen claimed that the monster actually circled his boat a few times. He described it in roughly the same terms: 80 feet long, head like a horse, black eyes. But he watched it for hours and never felt threatened. In fact, Allen described the creature as almost playful, something he never expected from such an otherworldly monster. The summer of 1817 was filled with sightings of the Gloucester sea serpent. Every time the tide came in, it seemed there was something new following it. More whispers, more fear, more first and second-hand reports. For many tales, that would be enough. Whatever it was already guaranteed a place in the local lore. But not this creature. The sea serpent of Gloucester, you see, was far from finished. In the coming days, the culture in Gloucester would shift. For almost 200 years, the people of the region had whispered about the creature. They warned their children to beware of the coast, to keep a watchful eye on the dark Atlantic waters just beyond their door. But as the sightings piled up at an alarming rate, people were beginning to wonder if something else should be done besides just talk and worry. Maybe they needed to take action. Perhaps some suggested they should hunt it down. It's a very human reaction. When we fail to understand something, we tend to attack it. If it's an unknown, it can be a threat. At least that's our gut reaction to those moments. I'm not saying it's a good reaction, just the natural one. So the people of Gloucester can't be blamed for deciding to act. They were, after all, afraid for their safety. The tipping point seemed to have been on August 14th. It holds the record for the largest number of sightings in a single day, not just in Gloucester, but in all of history. 17, in fact. 17 sightings. 17 individual descriptions from independent reports. And when that many people have that many frightful experiences, well, it has a tendency to push a society over the edge. On August 14th, 1817, Matthew Gaffney decided to take matters into his own hands. He was the carpenter for a local fishing vessel, but that day he didn't go out with his crewmates. Instead, he stayed behind and took his own boat into the waters just south of the Gloucester harbor. He was joined by his brother and one of their friends. It wasn't long before the three men found what they were looking for. Off in the distance, they could see a dark, undulating shape of the sea monster slipping in and out of the water, so they guided their boat closer for a better look and, of course, a better shot. As they approached, they could see the creature in more detail. Same horse-like head, same dark eyes. It was apparently a dark green color mottled with brown, but white on the underbelly. Here it was, the beast that had been frightening the village, the monster that shouldn't exist. Here was the thing they had come to hunt. So Gaffney reached for his rifle and took aim. He fired, and all three of them swore he hit the target. Right in the head, in fact. But nothing happened. They saw no blood. The serpent didn't even flinch. Instead, it dove under the dark waves, and that's when they noticed that it was headed straight towards their boat. Maybe the Native American had been right all along. If someone was to shoot it but not kill it, the creature would become an angry, deadly threat. Gaffney and the others braced themselves for an attack, but the attack never happened. The serpent resurfaced on the other side of their boat and began to coil and uncoil in the water, moving erratically and stirring the ocean into a cauldron of foam. But it never approached them. In the end, Gaffney sailed home empty-handed. What he didn't know was just how easy it could be to get close to the creature. In fact, 2 months later, 2 young boys would accomplish what Gaffney never could. They stood over the serpent's dead body. Well, sort of. You see, in the late 1700s, there was a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus. He's the person responsible for developing the scientific system for classifying living organisms, the same system we still use today. In the 1790s, the Linnaean societies were formed all across Europe and America with the goal of discovering and classifying new plants and animals. So, when 2 boys stumbled upon the dead body of a sea serpent on the rocky beach near Gloucester Harbor in October of 1817, their parents called the Linnaean Society of New England to help study it. What they found was a 3-foot-long snake-like creature. It was much smaller than the sightings had reported, but the reason was obvious to the Linnaean Society members standing over it. It was a baby. The full-grown serpent had entered Gloucester Harbor to lay its eggs, and this was one of the young that didn't survive. So the society members declared it a new undiscovered species of snake and called it Scoliophus atlanticus, the Atlantic humped snake. For a while. A few days later, another naturalist, Alexander Lisieux, studied the corpse and said it was nothing more than a common black snake. With no specimen left to study today, it's difficult to say who was correct. And then things sort of slowed down in Gloucester. There were only 12 sightings in 1839, and that decreased to 9 in 1875. It's not that the town itself was shrinking. To the contrary, Gloucester has grown a lot since then, but the sightings just sort of faded away. In the first 5 decades of the 17th century, the frequency of serpent sightings dropped roughly one per year, a far cry from the golden days of the early 1800s. Whether or not that has been a disappointment to the people of Gloucester is unclear, but there's more fear. Oh gosh, I misread that statement. There's no more fear, no more worry, and no more cautious glances at the dark waters of the harbor. I'm working on it, iFeeks. There you go. If the Gloucester sea serpent was in fact a real undiscovered sea creature, we will most likely never know. Whatever it was, it seems to have slithered out of reach, existing now only in the dark pages of history, and perhaps the depths of Gloucester Harbor. I'm going to take a drink. Hold on. Okay, we're back. The ocean is deep and dark and full of mystery. That's the sort of space that invites fear and stories and superstition. For centuries, sailors have been considered some of the most superstitious people in the world. Their culture is full of bad omens, good omens, mythical creatures, and unique rituals. It's most likely a side effect of their risky profession. On the open seas, your life hangs in the balance every moment of every day. An unexpected storm, a hidden reef, a concealing fog, anything can sneak up on a vessel and pull it down into the depth of those cold black waters. So it's no wonder that sailors have feared something darker, something more deadly than just the waves. Whether it's been the tentacles of the kraken, the call of the siren, or the coils of some sea serpent, the ocean's mythology is home to a dangerous aquatic menagerie. Thankfully, science has pulled the veil back on a number of these tales. Sometimes, as in the case of mermaids, there really is nothing to fear. Other times, the tentacles are just as long as we might have imagined, but far less deadly. But there's so much about the ocean we still don't know. In many ways, it's the final undiscovered territory. Beneath the waters off the coast of Gloucester, there's a shelf in the ocean floor. It's like a plateau that skirts the mainland, where the water is shallower, maybe 200 or so feet deep. Farther out to sea, the water depth is more like 3,000 feet, which makes the waters off the shelf sort of a world of their own. That shelf extends all the way up the east coast of North America, and it was on that shelf, in the waters of Fortune Bay on the southern side of Newfoundland, that something odd happened in May of 1997. Two fishermen from Little Bay East were in their boat when they saw something large in the water. At first they assumed it was a collection of garbage bags, floating free after having fallen off another ship, so they guided their own boat over to retrieve them. When they got there, they quickly realized that the shapes weren't garbage bags. They were the humps of a long-necked creature. The skin color was lighter than the Gloucester serpent, a sort of medium gray, but the rest of the description sounds eerily familiar. 40 or so feet long, large dark eyes, and a head that both men described as horse-like. As they approached, the creature lifted its head above the water and looked at them. For a moment, no one moved, no one made a sound. Neither the men nor the creature. And then, without warning, it quietly slipped back into the water, disappearing beneath the waves. Our fear of the sea always seems to float just beneath the surface. And if the stories are true, it's not alone. Yeah, so there's only 2 stories left in this section, and then we will be moving on to the next one. Okay, I will finish this section off, and then we'll probably call it a night, because I am very crispy. Mom just asked me if I saw her son walking by, saying he's about 10 years old, he's fat. Yeah, I saw him. Jeez. Mom of the year. Right there. Lost sheep. Webster County, West Virginia is down in the southeastern corner of the state, right near the Virginia state line. It's beautiful country, right by the Shenandoah National Park and the northern tip of the patch of the national forest that spans 3 states. I've driven through it, and I can tell you categorically that it's breathtaking. Hydrate, okay. I guess I do get less crispy after I drink. Fair enough. But a century or more ago, I can also imagine it was harsh, especially in the winter. It's always on this frontier, isn't it? One of those frontier towns was, and still is, Burgoo. It sits on the Elk River, one of countless little rivers that cut through the valleys between the countless little mountains that fill up the country. Today there are just 94 people in town, and maybe half a dozen roads, but it's still there, holding on tight. Because it's a tough town, and it's been through a lot. Take the story of Daniel Jungins. I don't know when he and his family moved to the mountain by the river, but there was a whole little community there by the 1890s. Maybe he started his family there. Maybe he even died there decades later. The mountain has their world, their home. Oh, I'm so sorry. The mountain was their world, their home, and just about all they ever knew. The winter of 1894 to 1895 was harsh. Again, this was more than a century ago. There were no snowblowers or plows. When it snowed, life sort of came to a standstill. And when it snowed hard for days in late January of 1895, Daniel Junkin started to worry about his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Warnick. On the 1st of February, Daniel sent his 10-year-old daughter, Landy, out into the snow to check on Mrs. Warnick. It was a 2-mile walk. Now, I'm not going to pick apart his parenting decisions or ponder why he didn't go himself. 2 miles is a long walk for a 10-year-old, and in the snow it's even worse, but I think kids were made of tougher stuff back then. At any rate, he sent her. Just read Donkey's message. Yes, keep me suitably lubricated. That's not a quote. But Landy never arrived. Of course, her family and neighbors went out looking for her, hoping to find her and bring her home. But all they managed to find was a solitary line of footprints in a smooth field of white. So they followed them. The tracks went on for some distance, and then, in the middle of an open field, they simply stopped. There was no girl waiting at the end of the tracks, no body, or any other clue where she might have gone. They just stopped. The search continued and they worked fast. Winter nights in West Virginia, especially in February, were bitter and deadly. They watched the sun set like a ticking clock and knew when they hadn't found her that their hope had vanished with the light. They searched again the next day, and then another, but Landy Junkins was never seen again. Her tracks told a bizarre story. She was there one moment, walking and moving in the right direction, and then gone, vanished without a trace. A day or two later, Hans Hardrick wrapped up his day by guiding his sheep into a small shed he had built to protect them from the cold winter winds. He made sure they had everything they needed and then latched the door. That door, which faced the house, was the only way in or out. The next morning, Hardrick went to check on the sheep. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and then stopped. One of his animals was missing. The remaining sheep had all huddled into one of the corners as if they were afraid of a predator. Glancing around, Hardrick noticed that small pieces of wood and bark were scattered all around the floor. Looking up, he discovered why. There was a large hole in the ceiling, large enough, in fact, for a sheep to fit through. The people of Webster County, West Virginia, did the math. They remembered poor little Landy and her mysterious disappearance. They pondered the lost sheep and the hole in the ceiling. Pretty soon, they were convinced that something was hunting them from the sky. Little Landy and Mr. Hardrick's sheep were both proof of that. So their village went on the defensive. Children were kept indoors to protect them. Farmers watched over their livestock with added vigilance. The whole community was in lockdown, with one eye on what was most valuable to them and the other on the sky. Then, a few days after the sheep was stolen through the roof of the barn, the county sheriff and his grown son were making their way out of the forest after an unsuccessful hunt when they stepped into a clearing. Out there in the open, they saw 2 deer, a doe and her fawn, trying to fight off something enormous. The men couldn't see it clearly, but from where they stood, it looked like a giant bird, or at least something with huge wings. Before they could rush towards the animals to try to help, the creature grabbed hold of the fawn and rose into the air with it. They watched as it flew higher and higher, heading straight towards the mountain east of town. Most historians who have heard these tales have walked away with cold, logical answers. It was an eagle and nothing more, but what eagle can pick up a 10-year-old child? Or a sheep? Or a fawn? I get it, it's easy to say it was an eagle. They're predatory birds and they're big, but these events suggest something else. And the fact that they happened less than 100 miles from the Ohio River Valley, where there have been sightings of a winged creature that some people call Mothman and other people compare to a giant others compare to a giant owl, well, it makes you wonder. Oh, and the mountains the Junkin families and their friends lived on? It had a name. For as long as anyone can remember, it has always been called Owl's Head. Last story! Ah! One word. There's a school in Jefferson, Wisconsin with a name that sounds like it was pulled right out of the pages of a comic book or dark urban fantasy novel. The St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children. It has a nice ring to it, right? But St. Coletta wasn't home to a group of crime-fighting superheroes or even a gathering of exceptional but peculiar students. It wasn't even a school, really. Its original name might hint at the true nature of the place, the St. Coletta Institute for Backward Youth. It was, for all intents and purposes, a home for mentally disabled individuals. It opened its doors in 1904 and altered its name in 1931 to include the more poetic, exceptional children. Along the way, it played host to people from all walks of life. The infamous resident would probably... The most infamous resident would probably be Rose Kennedy, sister of former President John F. Kennedy. She spent most of her life at St. Coletta's after an unsuccessful lobotomy at the hands of Dr. Walter Freeman had left her... Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. She spent most of her life at St. Coletta's after an unsuccessful lobotomy at the hands of Walter Freeman left her permanently disabled. While there, she had a private house on the school grounds. St. Coletta had a lot of land, nearly 175 acres in fact, and allowed the school to spread out and meet the growing need for housing. But there were other things on campus, as well as things that the school did not build. Native American burial grounds. Jink. Okay. Thank you for reminding me. I was getting crispy. You're so right. Among the night guards in the mid-1930s was a man named Mark Schackelman. Part of his job was to walk the campus, flashlight in hand, looking for signs of trouble. It was a quiet, peaceful job, most likely, although those Wisconsin winters must have been brutal. One night in 1936, Mark was walking his usual patrol route through the property, which took him past a number of burial mounds. The beam of his flashlight bounced across the dark grass as he walked. Suddenly, he stopped. Someone was kneeling on the ground at the base of one of the mounds, and the person was digging. He assumed it was a local, maybe out looking for trouble, or maybe seeing if the mound held anything of value. But when he focused the light directly on the person, he realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a thing. Schackelman said it was roughly human-sized, but it was covered from head to toe in dark fur, and the way it was kneeling didn't seem human either. But he didn't have a lot of time to study it, because when it noticed the light, it stood up and bolted into the night. Mark didn't stick around to inspect the area. He raced back to the main campus building and clocked out for the night. But the next day, with the sun shining brightly overhead, he returned and gave the burial mound a second look. There were signs that the earth had been dug up. Huge gouges had been made in the lawn and soil, and in the dugout areas, Mark could see something that resembled claw marks. Now, Mark was a lot braver than I would have been in his shoes. He clocked back in that day, and when it came time to patrol the campus in the dark by himself, he did it. Crazy, isn't it? I don't know if he expected it or hoped not to encounter it again, but when he reached the same spot he had the previous night, he found the creature back on its knees, digging in the ground. But rather than run away, it stood up and stared him down. Mark got a better look at it this time. It was about as tall as he was, but the creature's chest was large and muscular. The arms had hands that looked like they had been crossed with the claws of an animal. Tall ears, fur all over, and oddly shaped legs. But the most surprising thing that happened that night was that this thing actually spoke to him. It said only one word, and to be honest, I'm not sure Mark understood that it was a word for a very long time. But according to his notes and sworn testimony, it did indeed say something to him. Adara. Mark spent the rest of his life keeping the events of that night a secret. Only his wife ever knew, and that doesn't sound like the behavior of someone who is making up stories to get attention or fame. In 1958, when he thought he was dying from a terminal illness, Mark finally broke his silence and told his son about it. His son, it just so happens, was a reporter for a local newspaper, and he hoped that by sharing the story locally, others who had similar experiences might come forward and share theirs. As far as I can tell, no one did. Mark's experiences seem to have occurred in isolation, but sharing the tale did have one added benefit. It gave a lot more people the chance to figure out just what that one little word might have meant, and why the creature Mark encountered might have felt the need to utter it. Gadara. Interestingly, people for centuries have viewed werewolves as demonic creatures, human beings possessed by evil spirits and then driven into a beast-like state. They were burned alongside accused witches all throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Demons, after all, deserved to be destroyed, they believed. There's a famous story of a demon possession in the Christian Bible. The Book of Mark tells of a man who told Jesus he was possessed by a demon called Legion. Legion, he said, because we are many. The city where that happened isn't there anymore. It was the capital of a Roman province for a long time, and then it was destroyed in an earthquake in 747. I bring it up because the city's name has huge significance in the history of folklore surrounding the demonic possession. Its name? Gadara. Okay. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of that section of the book. The next section is titled Our Other Halves, and we will start reading that eventually. I'll put a poll up whenever I feel ready to do another reading stream. But that being said, I'm going to stop recording